On a sweltering, oppressive night in August of 1835, a coordinated terror swept through the plantations of North Carolina. Within a single, fateful lunar cycle, 28 days, 17 of the region's most powerful slaveholders met their end. Each death was marked by the same chilling signature, a crudely carved cross, etched into the bedroom door, the wood still damp with blood when the sun rose. The local authorities, gripped by panic, buried the truth so completely that for nearly 200 years, no historian connected these brutal murders to the hushed whispers that survived in the slave quarters, whispers of the preacher's prophecy. Tonight, we exhume that terrifying truth. We pull back the veil on the most systematically orchestrated slave rebellion in American history, a month of calculated vengeance that threatened to shatter the very foundations of the antebellum South. Before we delve into the dark saga of Reverend Josiah Cumberland and the 17 crosses that heralded death in Chatham County, if you are a seeker of lost histories, a connoisseur of truths too dangerous to be remembered, then do not miss a moment of what follows. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, for stories like this one, interred by time and terror, demand to be resurrected. Let me know in the comments which state you're listening from tonight. It's always fascinating to see where these historical echoes find a home. Now, let us journey back and discover how one man's tormented interpretation of divine scripture became the blueprint for the most chilling and methodical month in North Carolina's dark history. The summer of 1835 found Chatham County drowning in a strange duality, immense wealth born from cotton and a feverish, surface-level religious piety. The rolling hills of central North Carolina were a patchwork of some of the state's most prosperous plantations, their opulence constructed upon the broken backs of over 4,000 enslaved human beings. The county seat of Pittsboro hummed with the commerce of cotton merchants and slave traders, while grand, white-columned mansions stood as stark, elegant monuments to the brutal institution of human bondage. Presiding over this world was Judge William Peyton, a man ensconced in his imposing courthouse, whose stern Presbyterian faith was matched only by his unshakable conviction in the natural order of slavery. His domain, Peyton Hall, was a sprawling enterprise of 200 enslaved souls and served as the social epicenter for the county's elite. The judge prided himself on a discipline he termed Christian guidance, daily prayer sessions where the enslaved were sternly reminded of their biblical duty to obey their earthly masters. Among this privileged class were the Crenshaws of Cedar Grove and the Fairchilds of Riverside Manor. Colonel Benjamin Crenshaw, a hardened veteran of the War of 1812, ran his plantation with cold, military precision. His wife, Eleanora, cultivated a reputation for devout Christian charity, though her version of benevolence never once extended to questioning the morality of owning people. The Fairchilds, in a particularly grotesque enterprise, had built their fortune on the breeding of slaves, treating human beings with the cold calculation of livestock to be sold at market. Into this world of intertwined scripture and subjugation arrived a stranger in the spring of 1835, Reverend Josiah Cumberland. He was a tall, gaunt figure, with piercing gray eyes that seemed to see into one's soul and a voice that could rumble like distant thunder or cut like a whip. Appearing at plantation gates, he presented impeccable credentials, letters of introduction from respected Virginia churches, a well-worn Bible that testified to years of study, and a demeanor of deep theological learning. The plantation owners saw a powerful instrument for pacification. They could not see the festering rage he carried, a rage nurtured for 15 years, ever since his own family was torn apart on the auction blocks of Richmond. They saw a preacher, he saw his divine instrument for retribution. The first gathering was permitted on May 15, 1835, within the cramped slave quarters of Cedar Grove. Eleanora Crenshaw, believing religious instruction would foster docility and obedience, had given her blessing. She could not have conceived that she was inadvertently authoring her husband's death warrant. Among the attendees was Marcus, a house slave who, at 32, had learned to read by secretly observing the Crenshaw children's lessons. A man who had survived 2 decades of bondage by mastering the art of silence and invisibility, he watched with innate skepticism. But from the moment Cumberland began to speak, Marcus felt a profound disquiet. "Brothers and sisters," Cumberland began, his voice a low, compelling whisper in the close air, "we gather tonight not as property, but as the chosen people of the Almighty." The assembled men and women, field hands, servants, stable workers, sat utterly transfixed as the preacher opened his Bible to the book of Exodus. "And the Lord said unto Moses, Let my people go." But what happens? Cumberland posed, his grey eyes scanning each face in the flickering candlelight, when Pharaoh refuses. What happens when the master turns a deaf ear to God's command? He paused, letting the question hang in the thick air. The Lord visited plagues upon Egypt. 7 terrible afflictions to break Pharaoh's will. But we are not Moses, waiting for miracles from on high. We are the plague itself. A cold dread traced Marcus's spine. This was not the gospel of redemption and forgiveness preached in the plantation chapel. This was something darker, more primal, a creed of vengeance cloaked in biblical authority. Cumberland spoke of blood on doorposts, not of a lamb for protection, but of the oppressor as a sign of judgment. He recounted the night the angel of death passed through Egypt, striking down the firstborn of those who defy God's warning. "The Lord operates through human hands," Cumberland intoned, his voice swelling with fervor. When the Israelites reached the Jordan, they did not idly wait for walls to crumble. They marched. They fought. They seized what God had promised them. Leaning forward conspiratorially, he added, "And God has whispered a promise to me about this very land, about your freedom, about the judgment that must inevitably come." From his robes, Cumberland produced a small block of wood and a knife. With deliberate, steady movements, he carved a crude cross. "This is our sign," he declared, holding the symbol aloft. "When you see this mark, you will know the time of prophecy is at hand. When you see this cross etched in blood, you will know God's judgment has commenced." While Marcus felt a chill of horror, others in the room leaned forward, their eyes alight with a desperate hunger. 20 years of brutal labor, of families shattered, of daily degradation had prepared them for a salvation that looked far more like righteous retribution. Cumberland's voice dropped to a whisper that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of his listeners. "In 28 days, when the moon is dark and the night holds its breath, the prophecy shall be fulfilled. 7 times 4, the number of completion. On that night, the angel of death shall visit 17 houses. And when dawn breaks, the blood upon their doorposts will proclaim that judgment has finally come to Chatham County." In the weeks that followed, Reverend Cumberland became a whirlwind of divine purpose, his reputation soaring among black and white communities alike. He was hailed as a powerful orator, a man whose sermons could stir the most hardened heart. Plantation owners, blind to the truth, actually competed for his services, convinced his fiery brand of religion would manufacture more obedient, productive workers. Eleanora Crenshaw, a woman of deep but shallow faith, became his chief patron, organizing a circuit that would take him to precisely 17 plantations over 4 weeks. Unbeknownst to her, this circuit provided Cumberland with perfect reconnaissance. At each estate, he meticulously studied layouts, catalogued weapons, identified the most brutal overseers, and noted the masters who exhibited particular cruelty. More crucially, he identified his recruits, those enslaved individuals whose spirits remained unbroken, whose silent rage still smoldered beneath a facade of submission. Marcus, despite his deepening unease, continued to attend. Cumberland's scriptural knowledge was formidable, but his interpretations grew increasingly violent. He preached of Jael driving a tent peg through Sisera's skull, of David slaying Goliath, of Judith beheading Holofernes, always emphasizing that God required human instruments to enact divine justice. The Lord does not command us to love our enemies when they are Philistines. Cumberland thundered at Riverside Manor. He commands us to trust that His justice is perfect and His timing absolute. His gaze found Marcus in the crowd. But remember, brother, faith without works is dead. Faith without action is mere apostasy. After each sermon, Cumberland would select certain individuals for private instruction, always the strongest, the most intelligent, those whose eyes still held fire. In these clandestine meetings, advanced theological concepts were a cover for practical planning. Cumberland schooled them in the tools of righteousness, how a pruning knife could become David's sling, how a rope could serve Jael's purpose, how common farm implements could be transformed into instruments of divine will. He lectured on timing, coordination, and, most chillingly, the critical importance of leaving specific signs so that God's work would be unmistakable. His influence spread like a subterranean current. Whispers traveled through the quarters of a man who spoke of freedom not as a distant heavenly reward, but as a tangible, earthly possibility. Stories circulated of other revolts, other places where the oppressed had risen up. This growing influence did not go entirely unnoticed. Dr. Edmund Hartwell, the county physician and a man of quiet abolitionist leanings, attended several services and found himself deeply troubled. There was an unnatural comfort with violence in Cumberland's rhetoric, a familiarity with the concept of killing that sat at odds with Christian love. "There is something profoundly wrong with that man," Hartwell confided to his wife. "He speaks of slaughter with the calm expertise of a surgeon, not a minister of God." Meanwhile, Judge Peyton remained smugly oblivious, secure in his belief that God's natural order, with he and his peers firmly at the top, was immutable. As the prophesied date neared, the tension became a palpable hum in the air. Cumberland's organization expanded with terrifying efficiency. Using biblical roles as cover, he established a sophisticated network. Some were designated watchmen, like Ezekiel, tasked with observing the master's routines. Others were messengers, like the angels of Revelation, carrying coded information between plantations. The most trusted were anointed instruments of divine justice, like the angel of death in Exodus. Their communications were woven into spirituals, psalms, and even the specific carving techniques of the crosses themselves. Marcus, positioned in the big house, became a terrified witness to both the conspiracy's meticulous development and the white community's utter blindness. He watched Eleanora Crenshaw plan a grand party to celebrate Cumberland's ministry, scheduled for August 29, mere hours after the planned uprising, even as he saw stable hands sharpening tools with grim purpose. The full, horrifying scope was revealed in a final meeting deep in the woods behind Cedar Grove. By torchlight, Cumberland unfurled a crude but accurate map of the 17 target plantations. "The night of August 28 shall be our Passover," he declared, his eyes reflecting the flames. "But we are not the lambs seeking protection. We are the avenging angels, and their doorposts will be marked not with lamb's blood, but with the blood of their own profound guilt." Each target, he explained, had been chosen for specific crimes, Crenshaw for his brutality, Peyton for legalizing oppression, the Fairchilds for their monstrous breeding enterprise. "When morning breaks," Cumberland concluded, his voice soft yet terrifying, 17 crosses carved in blood will announce that God's patience has ended. The survivors will know their judgment is coming, and they will be forced to see that we are not property, but human beings capable of both immense suffering and righteous vengeance. Marcus understood he was witnessing not a spontaneous riot, but a calculated revolution. Yet, he also sensed something personal driving Cumberland, a hatred that transcended theological fervor. This suspicion was confirmed days later when he overheard the preacher's carefully constructed ministerial accent slip, revealing the cadence of the quarters. 20 years, Cumberland whispered to an old man named Solomon, his voice thick with anguish. 20 years since they sold my Sarah and our children south to Georgia. 20 years of searching, of grieving, of planning for this moment. God may work through human instruments, but sometimes those instruments have their own powerful reasons for accepting the call. The truth struck Marcus with the force of a physical blow. Reverend Josiah Cumberland was a fiction. This was Josiah Freeman, a former slave, consumed by a very human, all-consuming desire for revenge, using religion as both his weapon and his justification. This revelation coincided with Dr. Hartwell's own investigation. Piecing together the mysterious deaths of 3 of Cumberland's inner circle from what he diagnosed as psychological strain, not religious ecstasy. Alarmed, he took his concerns to Sheriff Davies, forming a posse that rode for Cedar Grove on the night of August 28. They arrived to find Colonel Crenshaw dead, his blood pooling on the kitchen floor, a crude cross upon his chest. Eleanora was bound, staring in terror as Cumberland carved another cross into the table, calmly detailing the Crenshaw's crimes against his own family. Marcus, who had arrived to warn them, was discovered. Cumberland, rather than anger, met his hesitation with pity. Your conditioning runs deep, brother. But the deed is done. Now, will you help complete God's work, or will you join those who would return us to chains? It was a choice between complicity in massacre or death. The standoff was shattered by the arrival of Hartwell and the posse. Cumberland seized Eleanora as a shield. You call this justice? He screamed. One master dies and you mobilize the county. Where was your urgency for the thousands we have lost? It was Marcus who broke the impasse, appealing to the man he now knew as Josiah Freeman. Brother Cumberland, you taught us God works through many instruments. Perhaps the doctor is his instrument, too. Perhaps your mission is not to kill, but to bear witness. The fight drained from Cumberland. He released Eleanora and dropped his knife. My name, he said, his voice empty of all its former fire, is Josiah Freeman. His confession echoed through the room, a truth more shocking than any biblical prophecy. The subsequent trial was a sensation. Cumberland, now Freeman, used the platform not to beg for mercy, but to deliver a devastating indictment of the slave system. He spoke with eloquence and painful detail of families torn apart, of lives commodified, of a humanity systematically denied. I do not ask for mercy, he concluded. I ask only that you understand why mercy became an impossibility for me. When you reduce people to property, you cannot be shocked when they seek to reclaim their humanity by any means available to them. He was found guilty and sentenced to hang. His execution on October 15, 1835, drew thousands. From the gallows, he delivered his final, powerful sermon, I go to my death knowing my children, if they live, remain in chains. I go knowing this system will continue. But I also go knowing other men will rise. Eventually, this great sin will demand its full accounting. His prophecy was fulfilled, not through his planned night of terror, but through the civil war that erupted decades later. The local response to his rebellion was a brutal crackdown, with harsher laws and greater restrictions, which only deepened the desperation he had embodied. Marcus lived to see emancipation, forever haunted by his role in those events. Dr. Hartwell was tormented by the knowledge that while he had saved lives, he had likely preserved a monstrous system. Eleanora Crenshaw, uniquely traumatized, became a reluctant, isolated voice for reform. The official records were lost to a mysterious courthouse fire in 1863, ensuring the full story would never be completely known. Cumberland, or Freeman, faded into legend, a spectral figure of vengeance or an avenging angel, depending on who told the tale. But his legacy is undeniable. He demonstrated that the enslaved were not passive victims but thinking, feeling, brilliantly organized human beings capable of challenging their oppressors on a staggering scale. He forced an uncomfortable national conversation about the psychological and moral rot at the core of the peculiar institution. His story is a dark, complex mirror. Were his methods a justified response to unimaginable evil? Or were they the rationalizations of a man consumed by a grief that curdled into vengeance? The 17 crosses were carved in blood and wood, but the deeper crosses were carved on the soul of a nation, and their scars remain with us still. This is the story they worked so hard to bury. This is the history fear tried to erase. But some truths are too powerful to remain hidden. And some marks, once made, can never be wiped away.